Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Miskatonic AV Club, a Mythos Busters production. I know, I can't believe it either. The school's back in session and the AV Club is back on. Sadly, we don't have the full class here tonight. It's just me, I'm Sean, and Ian. Hi, Ian.
Hello.
We're missing Scott, of course, and we're missing Nick, though. You know, if we're being fair, Nick isn't really taking the class. He's just that random friend who wanders in and sits in the back sometimes.
He's auditing.
I suppose that would make Tom like the cool senior who graduated last year.
He's doing an independent project.
So he's earning college credit already.
Yeah.
So tonight or today or whenever it is that you happen to be listening to this on demand entertainment, we are looking at the player cards from the Blood on the Altar Mythos pack. So without further ado, let's get back on that bike and hop right into it. Ian.
Yes.
Why don't you lay out our first card?
Okay. So our first card is
prepared.
And I am prepared for the worst. So I'm very on message here. So our first card is a Guardian event, prepared for the worst. 1 cost, an intellect and combat icon. The tactic trait. Search the top 9 cards of your deck for a weapon asset and add it to your hand. Shuffle your deck.
So, thoughts?
Well, I was temporarily mesmerized by the art because I feel like whenever we do these, I actually look for the first time in depth, and it's kind of funny. It looks like some kind of shed in the backyard with all kinds of weapons there. So,
yeah, I kind of
like that art.
This has got to be like Mark's backyard, right? This is.
I'm thinking, yeah. It seems like the kind of thing he would have.
I like how he's got the really practical weapons. He's got the tool, the machete, the shotgun, the rifle. We got a Tommy gun up top, and then we have a longsword. Just a longsword on the wall.
Well, you never know when your honor is called into question and you have to have a duel or something. So, I like prepared for the worst. I think what it does is a lot of times you feel compelled to maybe run a baseline of like 4 weapons just to make sure, even if you have a first choice weapon, you want to make sure you get something out early. But this changes that a bit because it can stand in and be like a 3rd or 4th copy of a weapon if you really are just looking for a machete, say.
Yep, I would agree with that assessment. I think this is a really good Guardian card because obviously your Guardians at this point are going to tend toward really wanting that weapon up front so they can just be ready for those enemies when they show up. And 9's a deep dig. I like how deep that goes to grab a weapon. And like you said, if hypergeometrics aren't on today, but if you've got 4 or 5 weapons in your deck and you're digging 9 cards down, of course there are always stories of the people who whiff on this, but chances are your chances are pretty good at finding one.
Yeah, I was going to say the caveat is for people like me who tend to whiff on these can't miss effects. I have whiffed on prepared for the worst and drawn nothing. And in Lord of the Rings, that happened to me with cards like A Very Good Tale too. So that's just my bad luck. Don't let it color your judgment. I do like it for investigators who have a signature gun, like Jenny, prepared for the worst. Might be worth an off-class slot if you're really leaning on those guns. Because otherwise, 1 copy out of 30, it's a little inconsistent. But this, again, acts as kind of a 2nd or 3rd copy of that card.
Yeah, and I was just about to mention my Lightning Gun Zoe build, where this is obviously a key card. But I should probably stop for a quick second, have a meta moment here. I think our original goal with the AV Club was to do our best to do this in kind of progression style and kind of keep the discussion on cards that have released up to the pack we're discussing. We're kind of like a year and a half past this pack right now, so we're going to do our best, but you're going to have to bear with us, new listener, if you're coming back behind and listening to these in order. We're probably going to mention cards that you haven't heard. And you know what? ArkhamDB is a great resource for those moments.
Yep.
All right.
That's very fair.
Meta moment over. So I tend to go like one of. So I'm at like 4 to 5 weapons and 1 copy of Prepared for the Worst, except in a deck like that Slightning Gun Zoe deck, where that weapon is that specific weapon is so key to the strategy.
Yeah, well, it definitely helps, with that syndrome where you level up to some, hot weapon that costs a lot of XP and then you never draw it. And sometimes it's too expensive to take 2 copies of it. So, yeah, prepared for the worst helps a lot in that case.
Yep,
I
and
could definitely see a leveled up a version of this in the future that's fast, because if you are stuck without a weapon and you have this card and you're stuck with an enemy, you're still gonna have to take that opportunity attack. But I could see like a level 1 XP version or something that's fast that can bail you out.
or at the very least, just adds does not provoke attacks of opportunity, something like that.
Yep, that would work too.
Yep, and at the end of the day, like Casey says in the chat, these 2 icons, your intellect and your combat, you're just never going to be sad to have those in your hand.
Nope, those are good icons for guardians, especially.
All right, I've got eyes only for no. I'm just gonna abandon that one. So moving on to the next card. Keen Eye is a level 3 guardian asset. It has the talent trait. It is permanent keyworded. And then it has the fast action, spend 2 resources. You get +1 intellect until the end of the phase. Or spend 2 resources, you get +1 combat until the end of the phase. So this is the pack where we're going to get to talk about how every class has kind of their own version of this permanent talent. Guardians is interesting. Okay, so kind of starting on the ground level. Obviously, the interesting part about this one is that while most of these kind of talent boosts only last till the end of the skill check, this guy gets you to the end of the phase. So presumably, if you are going to do the same action that requires that stat more than once per phase, you're getting a little bit of a benefit out of it. So how often do you think that ends up being a benefit? Do you take this one very often?
I don't, but that also might be a result of the fact that mostly when I'm playing Guardian, it's part of a 2-handed team, and the Guardians in that case are not doing much investigating. So in a lot of cases, they already have a lot of combat icons and pumps going on, and so I don't tend to need it that much. I feel like Keen Eye really comes in handy more so when you're running solo Guardian, because you're going to need that intellect help, and the combat can help as well because it does last until the end of the phase. You just trigger it and then you get your 3 swipes at an enemy or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's about where I'm at. It tends to be a later buy for me, a mid to late. I suppose unless I'm talking solo, which I almost never play anymore. But yeah, I mean, again, they're the 2 stats that you're never sad to have. They're the 2 ones that help you actually get through the game. It's a little spendy, but as long as you've got a resource engine, I don't mind this card at all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the best fit for it is Zoe as far as Guardians we have right now, just because she, is a cash machine. And Mark, I'd say less so, unless you're going, because he already is sitting at that 5 combat and probably not doing much investigating, again, unless you're solo. Roland maybe, but it depends on your cost curve, because one thing we should say is compared to these other upgraded permanent talents is this is the most expensive. I mean, it kind of averages out. If you do end up taking, say, 3 tests with that pump, then you're spending 2 for like the equivalent of like 3 pumps. But if you're just doing it for 1, then it's pretty inefficient.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it gives me pause in taking this early, because I've had so many situations where I've only got 1 action left to fight, and this is my only skill pump, and in that moment you're a little sad about it.
Yeah. I have been trying to run a solo Zoe lately, and Keen Eye is definitely something that I would be looking to grab early for her. Because of solo.
Because solo. Good enough. Let's move it on to from a questionably situationally good card to, God, I don't know, it might be one of my favorite yellow cards, at least for level 0. I don't know how you feel, Ian. What's going on with you?
Yeah, I don't think that statement is too preposterous. um, this is a Toukaseeker event, Preposterous Sketches. It has a will and intellect icon. Insight traded. Play only if there's a clue on your location. And simple enough, you draw 3 cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
So surprisingly enough, this is one that I've seen some pushback on, and I think it comes from the type of players that are very heavy into kind of the action economy arguments. Coming from the, I know, but they can come from that perspective of like, you're spending 2 and getting 3 cards for it, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, um, I don't want to retread that argument again because we've done it over and over. But it doesn't matter always when you're spending an action; they're not always equivalent. Because of, say, if you're sitting at 2 cards and you suddenly need 3 cards to get up to that higher education, which we will talk about soon, this is worth its weight in gold. If you just need some more options for someone who's running a very draw-heavy investigator who just wants to keep committing icons, like all those situations, the fact that you're spending 1 action to just get those 3 cards in that moment is key, I think.
Guys, it may surprise you, but this is a card game. And in a card game, it's good to draw cards.
It is.
Now, I get that it costs an action. Yeah, see, I don't even want to address that argument. It's silly. There are many times when you're on a location with a clue and you'd love to draw cards and you don't mind at all spending 2 resources and an action to do it, so this is a good card. I mean, that's all there is to say. I think the only thing that I would say is that, as we've discussed many times before, draw in general in this game has a little bit of a taint to it because of weakness. So there are moments where maybe drawing 3 cards is worrisome, but honestly, the longer I play this game, the longer I feel like, unless you know specifically a weakness you have would absolutely wreck you, you just draw. You just draw through them, you play through them, like you don't, at least I don't, stop drawing because I'm worried about a weakness.
Yeah, the funny thing is, comparing it to, and I try not to compare everything to Lord of the Rings and continue that drinking game, but in that game, because of the 50 card decks and the way it works, I feel like I need card draw in every deck, and Arkham is not necessarily the case. I don't think every investigator has to be draw heavy, because sometimes some investigators just need a few key cards, and they're not relying on committing a lot of icons, and so something like Preposterous Sketches isn't that important. But for others, when you are, especially investigators that rely on using a lot of events because they're disposable, you need to be constantly drawing into them. For, again, investigators like, I'm mentioning a future investigator, but someone like Min who is committing a lot of icons, all those cases. Even Roland, because he plays a lot with clues on being locations, like this is a good pick for him as well.
Hey, you just double down on what he's doing with positioning anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This is an A- card for me. I don't know, we don't normally give grades, but I felt like the need to give this one a grade since it's a sketch that was turned into it.
I'm there with you. I do like the little elder thing drawing too, that the person is drawing.
Speaking of getting good grades.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
You see what I did there? Now do you see what I did? Okay. So moving into one of the most ridiculous cards printed in the game to date.
Yeah.
We have Higher Education, which is this one's me. Right? I didn't just steamroll, did I?
Nope.
Okay.
I did sketches. So
okay, cool. Higher Education, level 3 Seeker asset. It has the talent trait, the permanent keyword. And while you have 5 or more cards in your hand, Higher Education gains. Fast action, spend a resource to get +2 willpower for this skill test.
Oh boy.
And fast action, spend 1 resource, you get +2 intellect for this skill test. Now, as much as we were talking about how the potential for spending 2 resources, potentially only netting you 1 skill test, 1 bump to 1 skill test for keen eye if the timing doesn't work out well, higher education runs in the opposite direction. And presuming you can keep 5 or more cards in your hand, which Seeker generally does not have that hard a time doing, it's 1 for 2 is so bloody efficient. And the Seekers, I think, that can take this, like especially Rex and Daisy, who also cares about willpower, like, oh god, this card just offers so much value.
Yeah, it's pretty... It definitely, out of all of the permanent talents, and we'll be looking at them all in this pack, it's the most efficient, as you mentioned, and the most powerful. I mean, there's not much more to say about this card other than it is, like you said, one of the most powerful cards printed. It changed things for Seekers big time when it came out, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Just in making them even better at what they already do. And, as for Daisy, making her actually more viable solo and being able to sling those spells and all those kind of things. But there's only the one restriction on it, which is having 5 or more cards in hand, and it happens to come in a class that is really good at card draw.
I feel like that's not an accident.
Yeah.
But maybe this card should have been printed with the number 6 on it. Maybe.
Yeah, I think it's a little on the OP side. I think it could have been a little bit higher of a threshold. There have been a couple of cases where I've been stuck not hitting the 5, but I can't remember too many times where it's been an issue.
But that said, I would prefer, the occasional OP card sneak into a co-op game than cards be boring. So.
Sure. I mean, and I guess if there is a card that I've seen the most pushback from the community in various places like Reddit, etc., if it's not Rex, it's higher education. I mean, I've seen people actually be at that point of being angry about it, saying it's too broken and ruin the game, etc. And I'm not at that place. It's obviously powerful, we've made no bones about that. But I wouldn't put it at the realm of being, breaking the game. And if I felt that way, then I would likely push up the difficulty. And I'm a
crazy thought.
I'm kind of
leave it in the binder.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm kind of already at that place because of how when I'm playing two-handed Seeker and Guardian teams, because of some of the cards that they have available, I'm already at that place where I think I'm just going to default to hard for them. Because there are just certain combinations in this game that are just super strong.
Fine way to go, I feel. So yeah, higher education. Put it in yellow builds.
Yep, it's one of the first things you should think about upgrading for sure.
Yeah. Now, Ian, I know you're not alone in loving this next card.
Oh, I'm so glad I get to cover this one. Lone Wolf is a rogue asset for 1 cost, has an agility icon, talent traded, limit 1 per investigator, reaction when your turn begins. If there are no other investigators at your location, gain 1 resource. Oh, it's so good. You like getting resources in this game?
So
you only have to outlay 1 resource?
Yeah. And, I mean, I actually really like this card, and I like what it does, but thematically it bothers me a little bit, because you could have, 3 allies on the board and still be a lone wolf somehow.
Well, you know what they say about feeling alone while you're in a crowd.
Alone together?
Yep. It is so good. Now, granted, I am mostly a solo and two-handed player, so 3 or 4 player players might feel a bit differently about this card. So yeah, it's just one of those cards that scales differently, because in those cases it's harder to get alone at the beginning of your turn. But even then, you can pull a bit of shenanigans and just make sure you're going last as the lone wolf players, other people, and just kind of shoo them away so they
Yeah,
get out of
that
your
was
area.
that's what I was gonna say. When I play this card like all the time, I'm like, so you're leaving, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you want to get the hell out, pretty please.
Yeah. Please leave.
But
It
yeah,
is. It is just such a strong source of resources because it's essentially giving you almost that Jenny ability of an extra turn as long as you're staying alone. And with
I
Jenny,
was
she's
about to
getting
say, and
even
then
more.
in Jenny.
Yeah. It's huge for someone like Skids who needs resources to fund his ability. Lone Wolf was big for him. And don't forget the Dunwich investigators, they can all access it. If you're running any kind of Dunwich build who they need a lot of resources, maybe you're leaning heavily on talents, we're thinking maybe about at least one slot for Lone Wolf.
I'd probably go too.
Or two. Yeah, you can do that.
All right. So moving on to the next green card. God, this is just a good pack. Holy cow! I forgot how good this pack was. We've got Streetwise. This is a level 3 rogue asset. Has the talent trait, permanent keyword, fast action, spend 2 resources. You get +3 intellect for this skill test. Fast action, spend 2 resources. You get +3 agility for this. So yeah, this is a good card. God, +3 intellect helps so many of the rogues just get to where they need to be.
Yeah, it is.
The fact that it's 2 resources, I feel like that it says spend 2 resources on a green card, like that doesn't mean the same thing as it would if it said spend 2 resources on a purple card, right?
Right. It's kind of similar to how higher education minimum of 5. It's a restriction, but it comes in the kind of class that can get around that easily. Higher education is I think clearly the best of the permanent talents, but I would put this one second. It's so strong and it did so much to elevate the rogues from rogues had a little bit of challenges, especially in the investigating zone. Like it's hard to remember even how it was to play rogue before Streetwise because it was difficult a lot of times. There's not a lot, before lockpicks as well. There was no help basically in the realm of investigating. Streetwise comes along and all those problems are gone, especially because it's we haven't mentioned that yet for these, but they're starting on the board, so you can 100% consistent every game.
Yes.
They're there,
And that's so huge because
yeah,
with any investigator that can take this card, you're just gonna evade almost anything. Like
yeah.
when I've got this card on the board, I am not as worried about getting my turn 1 weapon down. I mean, great when I do, but I'm not paranoid because I'm like, well, if I pull an enemy, I can just evade it probably.
Yeah, it gives you such a feeling of security, especially in solo where you can sometimes feel exposed. Yeah, you don't have to worry about getting down that weapon early. Something enemy comes out, you can evade almost anything as long as you have the resources, which you should, and you can investigate almost anything. And even when scenarios throw those tricky investigate tests at you that you can't use flashlights on or whatever, just the naked investigate tests, that these just help you power through those no problem.
Yep. Streetwise good.
Yep.
I don't know what else I have to say about it.
Like higher ed, this should be one of your first buys in a rogue for sure.
Agree. Okay. Moving on to the purple cards.
Yep. This is mine, I believe. So Defiance is a mystic skill with a wild icon, the innate trait. Before revealing chaos tokens for this test, choose one of the following symbols: skull, cultist, tablet, or elder thing. Ignore the effects of the chosen symbol during this test, including its modifier. And I love the flavor text, which is simply no. Yep.
Thoughts?
This is an interesting one. This is we've talked about, this is one of the best cards for player cards, best packs for player cards looking back on it. This one is a little bit more hit or miss for me.
Okay.
Um, I like the idea behind it. I'm glad it exists. Like the idea that you can just ignore. Well, let me say this about it. I think it's a lot more situational than some of the other cards in this pack.
Okay.
I think it depends on because there are certain scenarios where particular of the special effects can be game ending. I'm thinking particularly of Undimensioned and Unseen. There is one where, and this isn't much of a spoiler because it's printed right there on the scenario card, but the Elder Thing icon forces
A big
one of the
enemy.
broods to just attack you right away. That can be game ending. It has ended several of my games and
Yep.
defeated people. So that's a case where Defiance, you just name the Elder Thing, and if it doesn't show up, fine. Okay, maybe you wasted a card, but it's your insurance policy.
Yeah, and I think this one's so much to wrap your head around because there's so many variables here, right? I
Mm-hmm.
find that I was pretty middling to low on this card in Dunwich, but I'm
Mm.
about to start up a Roland Gym campaign for future Path to Carcosa, and with that Chaos bag, start out with 3 skulls, and then for most of the campaign, you oscillate back and forth between just adding 2 copies of a single other bad stuff token to the bag. So when you narrow your range down to just those symbols in the bag, I feel like
Mm.
this one becomes way more consistent. And
That
you know,
yeah, that is a good point. That is a very good point because the range of icons is definitely smaller in Carcosa in most cases, and the effects are more predictable in that case. And a lot of them tend to be bad. I'm just trying to run them in my head. I'm not going to list them for spoiler and time's sake, but yeah, I could definitely see those being important. I think it's a case, part of what separates maybe a newer player from a player who's more experienced is just the decision making of what kind of tests you take and what kind of icons you commit. And I feel like Defiance is kind of a high skill cap card in that
yes.
regard because you really have to choose carefully when you're going to use it. Don't just use it on some random test. Like you need to save it for the key moments, especially those combat moments. I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about analyzing the board state, right? It's like, okay, this is an important test. X, Y, and Z tokens would wreck me right now. I'm Jim. I don't care
Yes.
about skulls. It's just really kind of taking it all in. I think this card is really effective when it's effective, and it's kind of boring when it's not. And I
And
think.
I've been told, and I've been told and haven't experienced it much because I don't play much on hard or expert, but I've
Yep.
been told this is a very good hard card, and I believe it because a lot of what changes in hard or expert is a lot of times in standard mode, it's like if you fail, do this bad thing, and hard or expert is like just do the bad thing no matter if you succeed. So defiance becomes premium in those cases. I feel like.
Yep, definitely. All right. I'd be really interested to see if we get a leveled up one that like lets you like choose
Mm.
2 icons or something like that.
Yeah, maybe with another wild, make it a double wild, or maybe like a will icon or something on there.
My mouth's watering. So, moving on to the next one, we have our talent. Oh no, this actually isn't a talent. See, God, Mystic's always got to be weird.
Mm, yep.
So we have Blood Pact, which is a level 3 Mystic asset. It is a permanent card. It has the spell and pact traits. Fast action, add 1 Doom to Blood Pact. You get +3 willpower for this skill test. Limit once per test. And fast action, add 1 Doom to Blood Pact. You get plus combat for this skill test. Limit once. So the purple cards in this one, I think, are probably some of the higher skill cap cards in the game. I think that's probably fair to say. I think as with any Doom play that Mystic has, you have to be really deliberate and really careful as to when you trigger it. You either
Hmm.
have to know that you're keeping enough pace to take the hit, which I find in a lot of cases that's never going to happen, or you have to have some solution to remove or otherwise deal with the extra doom. But any of that kind of doom play aside, this is a go ham card during the witching hour, right? So the doom.
Oh yeah.
So the turn before the agenda is going to advance anyway, you can just go wild on willpower and combat tests, and it doesn't matter. So what? Depending on the scenario, this is probably like anywhere from 2 to 4 turns per game, where you just kind of get it for free, and then beyond that, you kind of have to actually play around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and since this came out, we do have a future card, Moonlight Ritual, that helps us remove Doom. So that makes this a bit more flexible. But I think in general, in my experience with this is probably the permanent, was like you said, it's not a talent, but the permanent booster that I have the least experience with. But it's the other ones you can pretty much use whenever, given you have the resources. Blood Pact is definitely more of a timing game, whether it's the witching hour or whether it's just knowing like I need to pass this test, so the doom is worth it in that case.
Which in multiplayer is a hard sell at the table sometimes.
Sure.
But in solo, you're only costing yourself your own turn. So
yeah, and knowing the scenario, knowing whether you can afford to give up that time. I do find it interesting that the other icon on this is combat. So those mystics who tend to maybe rely a bit more on standard combat as well as spells, like someone like Jim, could get some extra value out of this one, I feel like.
mm-hmm. Jim, future investigator Akachi, she sits at a 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and I do think that kind of like Defiance, this is probably a really good card in expert and hard too, because that +3 modifier is beefy, and God, you need it wherever you can get it in hard. I've only played one game of expert, and it was kind of a joke game where we just used as many ultimatums as we could and never expected to actually win. But hard, I have played a few games of, and God, just getting as much as you can is helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
But be careful. only make that pact when it's gonna actually help the overall board state. As with any Doom play, you just gotta keep an eye. All right, Ian, could I gather you to summon up your courage and rise to the occasion to read this next card?
All right, rise to the occasion. I know. We're rusty. We'll shake it off. Is a survivor's skill with 3 wild icons. Sounds good, but wait. Innate trait. Commit only to a skill test you are performing, and only if the difficulty of that test is at least 2 higher than your base skill value. This was a card I liked at first, and then I tried it a bit and thought about it a bit more, and I don't like it so much anymore.
That reflects my experience as well.
Yeah.
Now tell us
at
why.
First, I saw the 3 wild icons at first, and I was like, okay, it helps you with when you're below. That definitely fits the survivor theme. I was like, okay, I was thinking about someone like Ashcan when he's not using Duke, he's having like a 2 base intellect. Okay, that gets me above. The problem is it just sits in your hand so much, because a lot of times, you're not taking tests 2 below. And then even if you are, say you're taking the 2 below, this is getting you 1 above, which is still not spectacular. I don't know. I just feel like there's much better ways in Survivor of getting to the same place that this card is getting you to, or better.
You know what kills this card for me? Is the at least 2 higher than your base skill. Because for most investigators, like say you're planning this card in your deck, you're planning it for one of your weaker skills, right? Most investigators' weaker skills are sitting at a 2. There are a few 1s out there, but those are rare. And you're sitting at a 2, which means that the skill check has got to be at least a 4. So, a lot of the treacheries out there, regardless of what skill they're checking, I mean, most of them are kind of sitting at like 2, 3. They'll get to 4 or 5 depending on variables, but Yeah, I just feel like when I've included this, it's a card waiting for a skill test, and it generally waits a while.
Yep, that's the problem. Yeah, 3 is kind of the baseline difficulty for most tests. Whether from the encounter deck or kind of 3 shroud is the standard. Of course, there are a lot that get above that, but it's just, yeah, I agree. It just sits in hand, and that's why I ended up cutting it, and I don't think it'll come back
Yep.
unless there's some special investigator in the future.
Well, even in Min, who spoiler alert really cares about skill cards. I mean, I'd have to for me to play this on her, I'd have to get an agility test of 4 or a combat test of 4. And again, then
Mhm.
it's only getting me at 1 up. Whereas if instead I just included mind over matter, that's just such a better solution. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
feel like everyone who can take this just has better ways to do what this card's trying.
Yep.
All right. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to get too violent and feisty on that last one. Because, of course, we're moving on to Scrapper, which is our level 3 survivor asset. It's the talent, it's permanent talent. Fast action, spend a resource, you get +1 combat for this skill test. Fast action, spend 1 resource, you get +1 agility for this skill test. So, before we get to whether or not this card is good, I do have to say that it's definitely the boringest of the
Yes.
of the 4 that we're getting. This is basically just like a permanent version of those core set ones that we had, right? Where it's just a 1-for-1 trade on resources for skills. It's your 2 enemy management skills, so that's cool. I do like that it's kind of focused in its strategy that way. I've taken this in Ashcan when he's got enough resources to spend on it. If you're going Dark Horse, that's a no-no. Well, maybe. I don't know. Some people might get crazy and be like, oh, when I spend 1 off a Dark Horse, then I'm effectively getting 2. But, yeah, I don't know. This one's probably second from the bottom of the pack for me. Of 4 cards.
Agreed. Yeah, I was definitely expecting, because all the other talents had something interesting going on at that Survivor would have kind of twist. Like, I don't know what I was expecting,
Well, and
but
Survivor's like the trash and recursion faction, right? I kind
yeah,
of expected this to be fast action, discard a card from your hand. Get
right, something
+2
like
to
that.
something. I don't know. Something a little bit more
But
flavorful to Survivor.
I do like Scrapper more than when I first looked at it, because I think the boring factor got to me. But since we first talked about the original talents of the core set, we said it'd be nice if they were permanent or just started on the board, so you don't have to spend an action and pay those resources to get them there. So I do like that aspect of it. I have the most I've used it, I feel like, is in Dark Horse or like Fire Axe type builds where you're trying to get your resources down and it gives you something else to spend. Um, it's tough because I feel like there might be survivors in the future that it's better for. Again, I definitely think as its uses, it's not bad. But I think about someone like Windy, I'm not going to use the combat much. And for the agility, I have, it's not much of a problem to pump it up. Most of the time, I'm fine with that. Yorick, he's not going to be evading much. It's kind of but he also has lots of combat help that I don't need to pump much. So I think of the survivors, Ashcan is probably the best fit for this, because you get stuck in those situations where Duke is a little tired, and this gives you some other ways to fight or get out of the dodge.
Yeah. I think this might be a card that hasn't found its investigator yet. Like you said, if we're looking to future survivors, if we have one that really kind of cares about just being able to fight right away, and they have a resource engine or they can run pretty lean, this is a decent buy. But right now it's alright.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate it. Not blowing.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
in time because it was an emergency.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I was waiting for the part of it. Joke, and it was already there.
Let's be careful with our use of the word joke.
This is a neutral 0 cost event, level 2. emergency quiche, supply traded. Some might call it cash. Gain 3 resources and draw 1 card. So the difference here, for those who are wondering, is you get to draw 1 card in addition to the resources.
Yep.
Well, we all know base level quiche is good. How do you feel about the fancier quiche?
Unexciting, but very effective.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, really, this is just a card I add to my deck when I want that deck to be more consistent. This tends to be like a middle campaign buy for me in most cases, because chances are if you've got an investigator, you've got some key cards lined up for your first few buys. And then, you have a random 2 experience at the end of a scenario and you don't feel like saving it up for, carrying it over for the next time. This is not a bad way to spend it. It's just going to make your deck more consistent.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of one of those unsexy, like, P fillers almost, like you said, when you extra. The thing about emergency quiche is it's always a good card. I still include it in most investigators. But it is a dead card just in the sense that it gives you, but it doesn't help you if you don't have stuff to spend those resources on. Whereas this version at least is giving you the resources and then also giving potentially another option. So it's covering both those aspects.
Yep. And in standalone, I think this is a decent one to look at. Because, you can kind of... I find in standalone, I'll decide, okay, maybe I'm going to go 19 experience with this deck. And then I'll figure out my experience cards. I'm like, well, I kind of just need this one more card to do what I'm trying to do. So I got to bump it up to 29. And I have 5 experience left over because I bought that other card. Great way to fill it out with a little bit of quiche.
There's always room for quiche. I feel like I haven't used this that much. But I think it's because I can tend to get tunnel vision when I'm upgrading, and I half the time have to remind myself that there's neutral upgrades out there. I'm always looking within the class to upgrade, but I
always have to remember that not everyone runs Delve Too Deep as well. Has as much experience as you can spend.
Yeah, sure.
I like how little you bought that. Yeah, whatever. But yeah, quiche, it's good. Eat it.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about the pack as a whole, and I know we already mentioned it, but man, this was consistently solid for the player cards. Like
Yeah,
even the ones that stick out as bad are just mediocre. They're not straight up bad. Or situational, right. Even. I don't even know. Aside from Rise to the Occasion is the only one I'm straight up negative on. Everything else is just...
It's definitely was a very meta-defining pack with those 5 rather, boosters, especially higher ed and streetwise. I feel like changed the game big time for rogues and seekers.
Oh,
and it's for rogues in general. It's a very good pack. Between Lone Wolf and Streetwise, Seekers made out very well. So yeah.
So if you're listening to the Miskatonic AV Club for tips on which packs you'd like to buy, I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a strong recommendation.
Yep.
If I was a betting man, I would bet because of that, not because of my recommendation specifically, but because of how good these cards are. This one's probably going to be out of print, probably more often than a lot of Mythos packs.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Do you think people take it a la carte with this game, with the campaign mode? Or do you think people just always buy whole cycles?
I see new players asking a lot, and I see them getting pretty much the same advice over and over, which is just buy in order, which is what I would recommend for this game.
Yeah.
But for some reason, because of availability, you are going a la carte, then yeah, you should think about this pack as a quick way to upgrade your decks in power.
Mm-hmm. If I remember correctly, last time Scott and I did AV Club, it was Essex, which has charisma. Mm-hmm. So there's your first 2 buys right there, in my opinion.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for our review of the cards from Blood on the Altar. Oh man, let's do some plugs, right? It's been a long time since we've done this. In case there's anyone who only knows us through our YouTube channel in the last year, even though it hasn't been producing anything. We do the Mythos Busters podcast, which you can find on your favorite RSS aggregator. We have a Facebook, we have a Discord, which I would recommend you join at discord.me/mythosbusters. Ian, what am I forgetting? The important bits, right?
I think so.
If you're seeing this on YouTube, check out our actual Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/mythosbusters. And of course, if you're seeing this on YouTube and would like it in its audio-only form, we have a separate RSS from our normal podcast where we just put up the audio from these recordings specifically for the AV Club card reviews, and you can find that under the Miskatonic AV Club, again, wherever your favorite podcasters. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. We'll see you guys next time on the Miskatonic AV Club.